Okay, I believe that we are live. I don't know what the hell that was. I clicked the go live thing on StreamYards and it was spinning for like a solid minute before it even let me on. So, hello everybody. This is Messiah's a Mythology, episode 2 of Bible Book by Book. So today we're going to be looking at some pseudepigraphical literature rather than the actual mainstream Bible today. Do I sound okay, everybody in chat? Just want to confirm that before we proceed any further here. Be advised, we will be doing questions and answers over the material that we're going to be covering today. But I would ask you all to refrain from posing those questions in the chat until a time as more appropriate, which really means by the very end of the stream. Yes, a bit hoarse, but okay. Yeah, I'm a little scratchy-throated today, but in high spirits to get to edumacating. Alrighty. I guess I can put this ticker up right now since we're just kind of waiting for people to show up because, of course, Susan, in the infinite wisdom of our YouTube overlords, continues to refuse to send out the notification to anybody. Go figure. So we'll wait and see if anybody else bothers to show up. If not, we're just going to proceed anyhow. I already dedicated myself to doing a stream today, so been putting it off for long enough. Q&A is up. Okay, that's good. You can either ask the questions in the side chats. I will probably be getting to them eventually, or a better place to put them would probably be in the Q&A section down in the Discord. I do have that open. Make sure that everything is okay here. She forgot your last video for me. That's okay. That video was not meant to be watched by mortal eyes. that was literally something that I got up from like a fever dream in my midday nap, excuse me. And I just decided to put pen to paper with that one, so it's okay. Katya thought it was adorable for whatever reason. I don't know why. Here I am making fun of her soulless, eyeless avatar, and she's like, "Oh my god, he's so cute." Okay. Let's get that queued up here. I suppose I could start sharing this screen here. That'd be all right. So this is the literature that we're going to be covering here today. We're not going to be covering all 87 pages here today. We're probably going to be splitting up this work into thirds. So my plan going forward is to cover the preliminary chapters of this work, and then part 2 is going to be like the middle section of the work. That's going to be more of the section that's involved with a very familiar character. Especially if you've seen my latest proper video. Well, even my latest video in general probably relates back to it's Satan. It's Satan, okay? So we're going to be covering those sections from there, and then part 4, excuse me, for this series would be covering like the last couple chapters of this work, and then we're going to jump back over to the Bible proper, go through Genesis 4 and 5, go through all the Cain and Abel stuff, and then next time we adjourn again, we will be for part 5 of this series. Keep that in mind. Chronologically speaking, we will be moving on to the Book of Enoch, which I know some of you are very excited for, as am myself. I have not actually read it proper yet, so it should be fairly entertaining, at least just due to infamiliarity. Interesting font choice. Yeah, it is. It looks like a middle school project, and they're like, I'm going to make this show up in my computers class. I'm going to make it look real fancy with this cursive. I don't know why I'm putting on this voice. Kids don't talk like this, I don't think. It looks like something I would have made like in 6th grade to try and impress my multimedia teacher. It's just like cursive font, green highlights, and everything else. We're golden. Submit that shit. I was going to get an F on it anyway. Alrighty. No, I am not going to cover all 87 pages in one stream. You should know by now that I am a pedantic asshole and that I read way too much into every single line of literature, which is probably why it takes me like half a year to finish a book, just because every time I stop and then I just have to transcribe like a whole 5 pages of notes, put appropriate tabs and highlights in, and then I'll finally move on to the next page. Hence why this series takes so long to produce. Multimedia class made me fade out animations too much. I won't say same, but listen, it's because I was in a multimedia class in my senior year that we even are talking right now. I would have never had the confidence to do this channel otherwise. Okay, I think that we are good to go. We're already about 7 minutes in, so let's go right ahead, and we're going to go ahead and start here. And so I'm hopefully going to be able to get this to open, maybe? Can I? There we go. All right. So the first book of Adam and Eve, don't pay attention to that by Rutherford Platt part. I don't know why he says by. It should be translated by, but whatever. So this is a pseudepigraphical text written sometime shortly after the advent of Christianity in the 1st century. However, it was speculated to be written a little bit later on, probably sometime around the 6th century. All we have for context clues for this timeline is that Satan, capitalized proper noun, is used rather than the title Ha-Satan, which we covered in our previous video. And the first prophecy of Jesus Christ is actually made during these events. Well, first prophesized appearance of Jesus Christ, if you choose to read this in the intended chronological order, which is right after the fall of Adam and Eve. So with all these references to external characters in the Christianized canon, it brings into question why this book was never canonized by the church. And remember, Enoch did the same thing, though he too was eventually decanonized from the early church once the lore was kind of set more into place. And this is actually despite the fact that Enoch, up until like the 4th century, was a very popular pseudepigraphical text. It still is considered canon within the Church of Ethiopia. I forgot that country's name there for a second. Literally the second most important African civilization ever, unless you want to put the Mali Empire above them. Or maybe the Spanish Moors, but yikes. However, in this text, in the case of this text, it's probably best that this was never canonized, as the entirety of it is pretty nonsensical. And also, it might have just been a case that maybe the Catholic monks who were reading through this thought that a side story in which the first humans is pretty much just their filler arc after getting kicked out of the garden has really nothing too much to do with the rest of the biblical canon in the grand scheme of things. All it really does is add some sort of crucial details to things which kind of get glossed over in Genesis 3 and 4. This is the pseudepigraphical text which gives us like an explanation of where Cain's wife came from, and to a certain extent where Seth's wife came from, but that's a little bit later on down the line. So I thought we would cover this one before 4 and 5. Just, of course, keep in mind I'm a pedantic asshole, and this is going to take some time to read through, though a majority of my comments are going to be posing rhetoricals, which are meant to challenge the new continuity this text attempts to legitimize, with a few tidbits of informational nuggets here and there to add clarity to the text and simultaneously inform you, the audience. So if that sounds good, we'll go right ahead here, and we will begin reading Chapter 1, The Crystal Sea. God commands Adam, expelled from Eden, to live in the Cave of Treasures. So on the third day, God planted the garden in the east of the earth, on the border of the world eastward, beyond which, towards the sun rising, one finds nothing but water that encompasses the whole world and reaches to the borders of heaven. Now, this is, of course, reading... This, of course, means that it's mentioned to the firmament later on down here in this passage, but also keep in mind, I don't know if this specifically applies to this text, but what you need to understand is, like, back in the old world, on maps, east was actually listed to where we would typically put north. So it could just be that they're actually meaning east is east, a spade is a spade. It doesn't really change things. But it could also mean that from a cardinal direction, east in this case could also mean north, which sort of contradicts what we covered last time, which is that we kind of narrowed down where the Garden of Eden should be based on context clues given by the Bible. And we concluded that the waterway which feeds into the garden is the Shat al-Arab, which feeds into the Persian Gulf. I don't know, just, of course, I'm being pedantic. So, verse 2. And to the north of the garden there is a sea of water, clear and pure to the taste, unlike anything else, so that through the clearness thereof one may look into the depths of the earth. And when a man washes himself in it, he becomes clean of the cleanness thereof, and white of its whiteness, even if he were dark. Take that as literally as you'd like. But I do have notes on this one. Now, one might read this passage, this third passage, and immediately think of baptism, as by the point when this book was written, Christianity and some of the methods of baptism had already taken root in the early church, though not the sort of believer's baptism or anabaptism, as both of those methods of cleaning the soul came on a little bit later during the Radical Reformation. Later in terms of, like, you know, centuries before anybody watching this video would have ever had a chance to be conceived. But later on in terms of the timelines that I usually have to work with. Now, there is, however, a basis for this in Jewish tradition, where the Tevilah ritual involves submerging a sinner in a small pool of water called a mikvah, which, considering both Adam and Eve, in this version of events anyway, would be Jewish, may allude to this being the case rather than, you know, what we typically think of baptism nowadays. Otherwise, this is just a cleaning ritual and baptism has nothing to do with it. Or, and I'm really going on a limb against the academic consensus here, this could point to the time period in which this text was composed being way later than originally envisioned. Keep in mind, I said before, 6th century is probably a really good estimate of when this book was written. However, it could have been actually after the advent of Anabaptism or believers' baptism was actually adopted into the church. We don't know for sure. And by the way, this sea of water, geographically speaking, it could be in reference to the literal Caspian Sea, or much more figuratively, if you really want to read into the purifying effects of the water, it could merely be Lake Urumaye? I believe I'm saying that's totally wrong. It's actually one of the largest landlocked lakes in this particular region of the world. And the reason that I say it may be considered to have some sort of like purifying properties, at least to peoples of the ancient tongue, is because it is an incredibly salty lake. To the point where if you look on the shores of the lake, even today, there's large amounts of visible salt suppositories on the banks. So it literally looks like there's like a big white ring around the lake. I would not recommend bathing in it or doing any sort of baptism in it, but, you know, take a shower afterwards, I guess, which, of course, is not available to Adam and Eve, but, you know, whatever. All right, going back to it, 4. And God created that sea of his own pleasure, for he knew that what would come of the man he would make, so that, oh my God, the capitalization of he really threw me off. All right, so that after he had left the garden, on account of his transgression, men would be born in the earth. Among them are righteous ones who will die, whose souls God would raise on the last day, when all of them will return to their flesh, bathe in the water of that sea, and repent of their sins. So you get another reference to a later Christian work, that being Revelations, whereupon after the final judgment day, God will raise all of the righteous. And then apparently they're all going to make a pilgrim. I say there because I'm definitely not going to be a part of them. They're going to have to make a pilgrimage to this crystal lake to cleanse themselves and their souls, which of course could also just mean that you might need to be baptized before death anyway, but who knows? Yeah, that's true. Pyrotic. The Dead Sea is actually a popular tourist site for floating and swimming, and I would just say, don't submerge yourself, and definitely don't do it with your eyes open with no goggles, because Jesus Christ. I had a note for this one. Yeah, it's basically just keep the crystal lake in the back of your mind for later. We're going to get to that a little bit later on in this very story. But when God made Adam go out of the garden, he did not place him on the border of it northward. This was so that he and Eve would not be able to go near the sea of water where they could wash themselves in it, be cleansed from their sins, erase the transgression they had committed, and be no longer reminded of it in the thought of their punishment. So the one get out of jail free card that both of them would have, and this does actually play into the story a little bit later here. I think it's in this very chapter, or maybe like a couple chapters later. This text professes that God is actually willing to let Adam and Eve back into the garden. However, the method of their redemption is, of course, completely, I don't want to say redundant. It has nothing to do with anything, quite frankly. it's based off of an arbitrary span of time in which time frame they're not even expected to do anything special. It's basically like, hey, stick it out in the real world for about a week, and then I'll let you right back in. Which creates many problems for the narrative, but we'll get into those a little bit later on. So, in any case, merciful and of great pity is a bit of a stretch. Oh, wait a minute. That's a little bit later on. That is 8. Okay, let's read up until 8. As to the southern side of the garden, God did not want Adam to live there either, because when he blew... excuse me. When the wind blew from the north, it would bring him on that southern side the delicious smell of the trees of the garden. Wherefore God did not put Adam there. This was so that he would not be able to smell the sweet scent of those trees, forget his transgression, and find consolidation for what he had done by taking delight in the smell of the trees, and yet not be cleansed from his transgression. Again, also, because God is merciful and of great pity, and governs all things in a way that he alone knows, he made our father Adam live in the western border of the garden, because on that side of the earth is very broad. It's also where most of the action in the Bible takes place. So from a lore standpoint, it's more just because that's where people actually popped up, but I digress. So like I was saying before, merciful and of great pity is a bit of a stretch. So yes, God helps humanity acclimate to their new lives on earth, but any attempts by Adam to kind of redeem himself and go back to the garden falls on deaf ears. And he does some pretty radical stuff later on in this text. But don't worry, God makes a completely empty promise to him in chapter 3 here, it says in my notes, which he doesn't end up fulfilling. Surprise, surprise, humanity does not go back to the Garden of Eden, and actively takes measures to screw Adam out of his triumphant return home. We're going to read up into those a little bit later. Some of the stuff in this text which suggests that, like I alluded to earlier, Satan is supposed to be the main antagonist of this story, but of course, Yahweh is just as complicit, as is the case with most of the New and Old Testament, frankly. So, if you remember back to part 1 of our video series, I believe it's in chapter 3 of Genesis. The reason why Adam and Eve can't go back is that it is said that consuming both the fruit of knowledge, which they already ate due to the serpent, but also the fruit of life, can make a mortal man like that of God. That is sort of retconned a little bit later on in this passage, in a chapter that we are actually going to get to eventually here today. I know we're going at a glacial pace right now, but we're going to pick up here fairly soon. None of the language in here is poetic enough to warrant scrupulous analytical discussions like this. But of course, this is a latter text where the suggestion of such of an interpretation of the Garden of Eden would be deemed heretical and probably get you fed to some of those Roman dogs, as this book seems to base itself more off of church doctrine rather than biblical verses. And what I mean by that is, by this point in history, a lot of the Catholic Church's doctrine has already settled in. This is well after the Second Council of Nicaea. The divinity of Jesus Christ, that has been cemented, and the nature of his divinity has also been discussed, debated, and resolved in quotations. Eastern Orthodox churches still exist for a reason. basically what I said in part one still rings true. The people who seemingly like to quote the Bible the most are the ones who will readily admit that they have not read the entire thing through, like we're doing here today, and they have not viewed it from a secular angle like we are attempting to do throughout the entirety of the text. They choose to interpret it either through political motives, religious motives, or some sort of legal defense are usually the three only times that anybody ever quotes the Bible. So it's more of a tool by that point, and a lot of the doctrine which revolves around the church has evolved from a necessity to prove a point rather than actually looking through the scripture and picking out certain passages to formulate doctrine. Hence why we are seeing so many reformations in the church as of right now. And I'm speaking solely on church attitudes towards things like homosexuality and gender transition and things of that nature. All right, let's move on to section 9. And God commanded him to live there in a cave in a rock. Yes, of course. Where else would a cave be? The cave of treasures below the garden. So this is yet another supposed geographic clue as to where the Garden of Eden is supposed to be. It's basically outright saying here that it's supposed to be situated on a raised plain, sort of like a plateau, or more accurately, the word that they use is a mountain. However, the name of this mountain is, of course, never mentioned explicitly and probably doesn't exist, as the only mountain between the Tigris and Euphrates is Mount Karaka, which is really, really far north on that plain, but not anywhere close to the Black Sea, which is one of the contenders for the Crystal Sea. Caspian Sea, which I mentioned earlier, is more eastward and still doesn't really fit within that cradle of humanity, as it's been called. However, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that there is a city just north of Shat al-Arab called Al-Qurna, which, according to the local folklore, is not only the site of the Garden of Eden, but they actually still have the alleged Tree of Knowledge. Except they don't. The Jujube tree, which they celebrated for years and years as the Tree of Knowledge, died off a couple of decades ago. And so the local residents were forced to plant a brand new tree in its stead, which they still called the Tree of Life for whatever reason, even though it's a completely different tree. Which you can see today, however, I would not recommend it, since that entire region of the world, and that town in particular, has been ravished by the Iraq War and made the entire city a more dangerous place to be on the inside the Middle East. No tourism is allowed there. The residents live in constant fear of their life due to radical organizations loosely affiliated with another religion, which we are probably going to be getting into at some point, probably years down the line in this series, when we eventually get in past the New Testament and into the Quran. We're not going to read the entirety of the Quran. We're just going to read the parts of it which kind of pick up and tell the side of the story separate from the development of the Hebrews and the Christians and all that. Let me go ahead here. We're moving on to chapter 2 now. Read through chat here. I heard you have social anxiety, so I'm here to judge you. Kind of. How many bullets are in that tree? From the pictures I've seen, I've counted at least 3. The tree actually does have legit bullet holes in it. That that's not even a joke. Yeah, and Pyrotic is correct, and it's pretty common for that region. A lot of those Christian towns in Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon claim some sort of landmark. I've seen some places they have, tried to say that, they have the Cave of Treasures mentioned in this book. They have, I think one town even claims to have like the bone that Cain used to bash Abel over the head in like some museum somewhere. I think that this one is mainly of note just because they were one of the first ones to claim that they had the Tree of Life. And then, of course, the tree is now dead, which I guess now immortality is a pipe dream for all of us. Rip humanity. Cockatrice, what species is the tree? Not that any single one on could realistically expected to live on forever, but it would still be interesting to know which one they choose. It was a jujube tree. And like I said, it was eventually replaced later on with a completely different tree. What about Adam and Eve escaping? What? You're mixing up your mythologies here, dude. That never happens. Okay. Unless, of course, you want to talk about like Pelasgos from like early Greek mythology, like prior to Aryan migrations into that region. Maybe that might be what you're getting confused with, but Adam and Eve has nothing to do with anything Greek. Well, supposedly. Of course, the Bible did have to be translated into Greek later on, but that's beside the point. This passage was actually written in Aramaic, and it was discovered in Egypt, pertaining to a Jewish religious tradition. So it's a clusterfuck text. What about Adam and Eve causing a big fire in a few worlds? Again, I think you're confusing that with maybe like Norse mythology, with like the burning of Yggdrasil and the last 2 surviving humans hid inside the trunk, which is a terrible idea. Why would you hide in the same place which is burning down? Like I said, though, there could be like some folky sort of like localized stories, which I'm not entirely familiar with. And I probably won't be familiar with unless I just happen by them by circumstance in my research into pseudepigraphical texts. And of course, the story would have to be transcribed, which is kind of hard to do for some people. Also has the Cave of Elias near it, but I question that. Question everything whenever somebody tells you that they have like some sort of biblical landmark or treasure or something like that. Like, you guys know the Shroud of Turid, the Shroud of Turds, I like to call it, because it's completely fake. Yeah, if anybody claims to say that, it's either a tourist gimmick or they're actually trying to sell you something. don't believe anything that anybody tells you, especially when it comes to religious scripture relating back to figures which historically cannot be proven to have actually existed. Right. Moving along. Chapter 2. We are really far behind where I would have liked to have been. We're already a half hour in and only a few notes in. Not too much to mention here in Chapter 2. It's actually a pretty short chapter. It's only about 5 verses. Somebody is calling me. Hold on here real quick. I gotta take this. Intermission time, boys and girls. I have to go and do something for somebody who's being annoying right now. It'll only take a minute. Talks amongst yourselves. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why I am moving. I can never fucking stream without somebody goddamn interrupting me for some stupid shit. It always happens 100% of the time. So, God, I just need to get the fuck out of this whole goddamn area. Okay, chats. Quit simping for Satan. My God. I don't know what the attraction is. I seriously don't. Fucking quit it. Chapter 2. But when our father Adam and Eve went out of the garden, they walked in... Thank you. They walked the ground on their feet, not knowing they were walking. And when they had came to the opening of the gates of the garden and saw the broad earth spread before them, covering with stones large and small, and with sand, they feared and trembled and fell on their faces from the fear that came over them, and they were as dead. which is basically a roundabout way of saying they fainted from shock. Now, the first time I read this, I didn't pick up on this. I thought it was just, the text attempting to be poetic and failing horribly in that matter. However, this is actually an important context clue, kind of foreshadowing a reveal which is made a little bit later on, which I think I already alluded to. Just kind of tuck this one into the back of your mind, why specifically it feels the need to mention them walking on their feet. Because whereas until this time they had been in the garden land, beautifully planted with all manner of trees, they now saw themselves in a strange land which they knew not and had never seen. And because when they were in the garden, they were filled with the grace of a bright nature, they had not hearts turned towards earthly things. Therefore, God had pity on them, and when he saw them fallen before the gate of the garden, he sent his word to our father, Adam and Eve, and raised them from their fallen states. Chapter 3, like I said, very short. I think chapter 3, I have 2 notes for chapter 3. All right, so we'll read up into them. God said to Adam, I have ordained on this earth days and years, and you and your descendants shall live and walk in them until the days and years are fulfilled. When I shall send the word that created you, and against which you have transgressed, the word that made you come out of the garden and raised you when you were fallen. Yes, the word that will again save you when the 5.5 days are fulfilled. So this is what I was alluding to earlier. I don't know why he says you and your descendants, implying that he's going to have children in 5.5 days' time, which, keep in mind, are literally 5.5 days. They're not metaphorical apologist advantist days. These are literally, 5 sleepies. and then you get to come back in. But when Adam heard these words from God and of the great 5.5 days, he did not understand the meaning of them. For Adam was thinking there would only be 5.5 days for him until the end of the world. You're going to notice throughout this entire passage, they portray Adam as the most melodramatic human being on the face of the planet. It is not even funny just how hypochondriac, I don't know if that's a word, but he's a hypochondriac about literally everything. And Adam cried and prayed to God to explain it to him. Then God, in his mercy for Adam, who was made in his own image and likeness, explained to him that these were 5,500 years, and how one would then come and save him and his descendants. Now, important distinction. This is not referring to the literal days that I had referred to before. This is actually this passage of the book attempting to say, no. The world isn't going to end in 5.5 days, Adam. You're fine. The world is going to end in about 5,500 years. Again, another allusion to Revelations. But before that, God had made his covenant with our father, Adam, in the same terms before he came out of the garden, when he was by the tree where Eve took the fruit and gave it to him to eat. I almost forgot. So at the end of verse 6 here, I completely overlooked this. I don't know why. One who would then come and save him and his descendants. is explicitly referring to Jesus Christ, which, again, like labeling Satan as a proper noun, kind of dates this work a little bit. So this wasn't, something that was written to be like a companion piece to literal Genesis. This is more or less just kind of existing to more or less bridge the gap between Old and New Testament by interjecting some iconography from later religious scriptures. And this is the second coming of Jesus. This is when he's supposed to come back, defeat the Antichrist, restore salvation to the world, blah, blah, blah. Zoroastrianism did it first. So verse 6, we already read 7. I have a note here for 8, but let me read it first. Because when our father Adam came out of the garden, he passed by that tree and saw how God had changed the appearance of it to another form, and how it shriveled. So, Tree of Life continues to reside within the Garden of Eden. However, God does actually do the sensible thing and destroys the Tree of Knowledge. Not sure why it was ever there to begin with. Second Temple Judaism kind of provides an explanation for that, but not really. Basically, the logic of it goes, he pretty much decides, okay, it's not worth anybody getting their hands on both the fruit of knowledge and the fruit of the Tree of Life, because then, they make themselves as God. So literally, like I said before, a goat or something could come into the garden, eat both fruits, and then we have a goat god, which I guess supposedly we kind of already do in this passage if we take it literally. But then this starts to beg the question, why would you even have an immortality granting fruit in the first place? And why does he allow for it to continue to exist within the garden, albeit under strict surveillance from a cherub? Is it because Yahweh requires the power of the fruit to indefinitely extend his own lifespan? Or is it being stored for later plans? I'm just posing questions here, but the fact that the Tree of Knowledge was killed and not the Tree of Life is very telling that this Tree of Life is supposedly important for something later on, if it is not already important now. All right, moving on to verse 9. And as Adam went to it, he feared, trembled, and fell down. But God in his mercy lifted him up, and then made this covenant with him. And again, when Adam was by the gate of the garden, he saw the cherub with a sword of flashing fire in his hand. And the cherub grew angry and frowned at him. Both Adam and Eve became afraid of him and thought that he meant to put them to death. So they fell on their faces, trembled with fear. But he had pity on them and showed them mercy. And turning from them, went up to heaven and prayed to the Lord and said, Lord, you sent me to watch the gate of the garden, but this gig sucks. When your servants Adam and Eve saw me, they fell on their faces and were as dead. Oh, my Lord, what shall you do to your servants? And then God had pity on them, showed them some mercy. This is a recurring theme throughout here. And sent his angel to keep the garden. And the word of the Lord came to Adam and Eve and raised them up. And the Lord said to Adam, I told you that at the end of 5.5 days, I will send my word and save you. Strengthen your heart, therefore, and stay in the cave of treasures, of which I have before spoken to you. And when Adam heard this word from God, he was comforted with that which God had told him, and he had told him how he would save him. All right? Keep that in mind for later, chat. So Adam is okay now because he's been reassured. Okay, I only have to stick it out for 5.5 days. He seems to forget about this the very next chapter. So, chapter 4, kind of an uneventful chapter. I don't even think I have notes on this one. I think it's just him whining. No, towards the end I do have a note. Okay, so I'll go through it. Basically, all you have to do is read the chapter titles, and you basically get a gist of what is going to happen. But Adam and Eve cried for having come out of the garden, their first home. And indeed, when Adam looked at his flesh that was altered, he cried bitterly, he and Eve, over what they had done. And they walked and went gently down into the cave of treasures. And as they came to it, Adam cried over himself and said to Eve, "Look at this cave that is to be our prison in this world, and a place of punishment. What is it compared with the garden? What is its narrowness compared with the space of the other? What is this rock by the side of those groves? What is the gloom of this cavern compared with the light of the garden? What is this overhanging ledge of rock to shelter us compared with the mercy of the Lord that overshadowed us?" Yeah, this is supposed to be a punishment, Adam. I congratulations, you finally realized that. What is the soil? Yeah, whatever. And Adam said to Eve, "Look at your eyes and at mine, which before beheld angels praising in heaven, and they too without ceasing. But now we do not see as we did. Our eyes have become of flesh. They cannot see like they used to before." So this is another apologetic paragraph, which falls flat on its face when you consider how many times the Bible makes reference to prophets who are supposedly not divine by any means, just ordinary men, who are able to see and interact with angels. Keep in mind Isaiah and Ezekiel. But even more damningly, if fleshy eyeballs can't observe angels, as Adam just said, then how did the townsfolk of Sodom become enamored with the angels staying with Lot? Because those are definitely not holy men. Just the opposite. So, but then again, you get into that whole thing about whether or not angels have a physical appearance or anything like that. Why later church doctrine says angels don't need to eat, and yet simultaneously in Genesis they said, "Yeah, come in and eat," and they did. Watch the angelic hierarchy video for more info on that. I'm just paraphrasing here, but this book complicates things in terms of the lore, the smaller bits of lore, not anything consequential, I will say. Later on, it actually proves itself to be a little more useful than the original accounts given by Genesis, particularly when it comes to Cain and Abel. But that's for a later episode. Right now, this is all basically filler. However, we should probably read through it because there are quite a few things that it can tell us about the state of the church at this time and what sort of doctrines have cemented themselves in it. I'm going to read these last couple, the last part of this chapter in there, and then I'll read chat again. Adam said again to Eve, "What is our body today compared to what it was in the former days when we lived in the garden?" After this, Adam did not want to enter the cave under the overhanging rock, nor would he ever want to enter it. But he bowed to God's orders and said to himself, "Unless I enter the cave, I shall again be a transgressor." Implying that, by not entering the cave, you have committed a double sin. So Adam is showing a little bit of remorse here and a little bit of self-preservation instinct, which flies right out the window later on. But again, reading ahead. Let me go ahead here, and I will go ahead and read chat here. There are actions that God cannot forgive. I agree. And there are actions that should not be forgiven. However, in this case, like the text is pointing out, he's basically setting... This isn't more so much a punishment as it is ordering your 2-year-old to go sit in a timeout chair until they can actually play with their toys properly. Let's see. Things being forgotten every few chapters is the rule, not the exception in the Old Testament. That's true. That's true. It seems like up until like Revelations was... Well, no, not even when Revelations was written. I would say like after like all the Christian doctrines got written down, and then the church started like integrating like its own like oral doctrines to its parishioners. That's when they actually started going back and like, you know, bleeding over all the different old chapters in the Old Testament to try and like reinforce what they were saying at the time. It is very rarely reflected in any sort of writing, unless it's like a pseudepigraphical text like we discussed last time with the Book of Jubilees, where supposedly Moses wrote another part of the Pentateuch, which is literally just him reiterating everything that happened in Genesis all over again. I would say not so much, James. He's saying like he's basically agreeing with Taco, but saying that applies to any religious source. I would say not, because Norse mythology actually does a pretty good job, albeit, you know, the prose and poetic Edda were composed much later on in time when literary devices were actually a thing. They do a pretty good job of referring back to older stories and, like, you know, reintegrating them into the lore. Like, if you pay attention to Ragnarok, it makes reference to the binding of Fenrir, the swelling of Jormungandr, the death of Balder, even though that story directly precedes it. So I don't know if you want to count that one. That one does a pretty okay job. As for the other ones, I'm not familiar with anyone that directly references its previous material. What you need to understand is that a lot of these texts are anthologies. And so they were written by multiple different authors from different periods in time. Some of them may not have even been familiar with each other's works. And that becomes especially problematic from a more modern perspective once we have the compilations published. And so you read everything all together all at once. And then you're like, wait, didn't they say that, you know, just a few passages back? Now, I'm not going to give this book a free pass because they clearly understood at least the baseline story of Genesis, but it's pretty apparent that they didn't actually read it. Again, nobody ever does. All right, chapter 5. Holy crap, we are really not going through this fast. Eve makes a noble and emotional intercession, taking the blame on herself. Then Adam and Eve entered the cave and stood praying in their own tongue, unknowns to us, but which they knew well. This is attempting to say that Adam and Eve spoke a different language than more of like modern Hebrews did. Modern being used in quotation marks. Possibly being lost with the construction of the Tower of Babel. where, of course, God confounded speech, and according to later sources, split the language into 72 different ways. Now, it doesn't say anywhere in the original Bible that the language which all people spoke prior to having their speech confounded was Hebrew. However, it's implied by the fact that they were God's quote-unquote chosen people, and the fact that they could directly communicate with him without having to alter their speech in any way, which is mentioned in the Bible, suggesting that Hebrew was the original tongue. And this is confirmed later on by sources, if you choose to count the introduction to the Prose Edda as a source, which is a future video which is going to kill me. I basically, if you have a copy of the Prose Edda sitting around, it probably has the abridged version of the introduction. Do yourself, well, I won't even say a favor. Completely render your entire life worthless and read the unabridged introduction to the Prose Edda. I literally had to stop, pull my hair out, and scream several times. Just because Snorri is such a Jesus simp that he basically just took a dump on his entire ancestry and history simultaneously. Oh, God, I hate that so much. Like I said, it's going to be a video coming up probably next year, if we're being honest. I don't have any plans to do it this year because the queue's pretty much filled up. And they prayed. Adam raised his eyes and saw the rock of the roof of the cave and covered them overhead. This prevented him from seeing either heaven or God's creatures, so he cried and beat his chest hard until he dropped and was as dead. Man fucking stopped his own heart by punching his chest. And Eve sat crying, for she believed that he was dead. Then she got up, spread her hands towards God, appealing to him for mercy and pity, and said, "O God, forgive me my sin, the sin which I committed, and don't remember it against me. For I alone caused your servant to fall from the garden into this condemned land, from light into this darkness, and from the house of joy into this prison." That's not technically true, but okay. "O God, look at this your servant fallen in this manner, and bring him back to life, that he may cry and repent of his transgression which he committed through me. Don't take away his soul right now, but let him live, that he may stand after the measure of his repentance, and do your will as before his death. But if you do not bring him back to life, then, O God, take away my own soul, that I be like him, and leave me not in this dungeon, one and alone, for I could not stand alone in this world, but with him only." Of course, women, can't exist independently of men. Somebody's got to mow the yard. It's not specifically stated pretty much anywhere if God had even created a place for Adam's soul to reside, if his heart really did stop here and he did die because he was having a temper tantrum. Of course, according to the old Hebrew scriptures, there's only one place of eternal resting, and that is Sheol, but we don't know if that exists yet. It's never been explicitly stated. So you got to think, where would his soul end up then? And it's the only place I can think of is the Garden of Eden. He's trying to get back in to the garden in the least direct route possible. But as we'll see here, God is just going to raise him from the dead again. And you took me the bone and made me a woman bright like him, with heart, reason, and speech. This middle part was absent. And in flesh like to his own. And you made me after the likeness of his looks by your mercy and power. O Lord, I and he are one, and you, O God, are our creator. You are he who made us both in one day. Again, you and he being capitalized. It's an old language thing, and it always throws me off whenever I read aloud, because I'm thinking that they're starting a new sentence. Therefore, O God, give him life, that he may be with me in this strange land, while we live in it on account of our transgression. But if you will not give him life, then take me, even me, like him, that we may both die the same day. And Eve cried bitterly and fell on our father Adam from her great sorrow, and had a femalism. Chapter 6. God's reprimand to Adam and Eve, in which he points out how and why they've sinned. Basically, it's another summary chapter going over things we already know. This is basically explaining to a 2-year-old what they did was wrong and why they did it, and why what they did was wrong. Except it's just basically like it's one of those because I told you so explanations. Basically, the only thing of note here is verse 5. I'm going to start going a little bit faster through these passages here for you folks today, so that we don't take too long. Of your own free will have you transgressed through your desire for divinity, greatness, and an exalted state, such as I have. No, it was not through their own free will. First of all, they were manipulated by the serpent in the garden. But secondly, I thought that the tree of knowledge gave them self-awareness. So how is it that they can simultaneously be ignorant to everything, including the fact that they're naked, but at the same time be self-aware enough to know that they are not immortal and not of knowledge? You know, it's kind of like a paradoxical thing. You would have to have the knowledge that you desire a higher state of consciousness, yet at the same time you cannot feasibly facilitate a state of desire for that higher state of consciousness without the knowledge of it. So, which is it? Again, it just confuses the entire narrative. And when we get into 6, 7... Yeah, 6 and 7 here, I have another note. It's the latter part of 6, but I'll just read the whole thing. If you had not transgressed my commandment and kept my law, and had not eaten of the fruit of the tree which I told you not to come near, and there were fruit trees in the garden better than that one. Keep that in mind. But the wicked Satan did not keep his faith, and had no good intent towards me, that although I had created him, he considered me to be useless, and sought the Godhead for himself. For this I hurled him down from heaven, so that he could not remain in his first estate. It was he who made the tree appear pleasant in your eyes, until you ate of it, by believing his words. Okay. So, I may be reading a little bit too much into this, but doesn't this imply that there were other supernatural trees in that garden which, you know, exist aside from the tree of knowledge and the tree of life? So God evidently doesn't have a problem with humans becoming immortal or gaining whatever unknown powers through the magic of vitamin C. But the moment that they start thinking for themselves, that's a big no-no, and we became the failed experiments. Okay, here's a thought. Why not just immediately smite Adam and Eve and start all over again? The gods did it in Greek mythology, or rather the Titans, and then the gods, but they did it. They didn't have, the level of hubris to just say, oh, I created these people in my image, therefore they should have been perfect, but they're not, but now I'm just going to try and make it work. Just start over again. It's fine. Setbacks happen. I mean, maybe not if you're God, but, you should have been able to prevent this stuff to begin with. I mean, he even has the perfect setup. He already, according to this book, got rid of the tree of knowledge. So why not start a new race of beings in your image to live in the garden? That way, they can have all the fruit they want with all the supernatural powers. Maybe seal that little manhole that Satan got in through, and then you're golden. Also, it should be stated that Satan got off scot-free from this whole exchange when you think about it. Later on in this same book, it reveals that he basically made the Serpent his fall guy, but from there, he's completely unimpeded. Aside from, mentioning here that he smacked him down into hell, there's really no punishment for him, like, ever, in this entire thing. I don't even think that Satan and God interact in this entire passage. I suppose you could maybe argue that he got banished out of the Garden of Eden too, along with Adam and Eve, and all the animals. For whatever reason, the animals didn't do anything, but they got kicked out too. Sure, but that begs the question: how did Satan even get in there in the first place? I mean, it says in a future passage that he got in through the west side of the mount, but it doesn't elaborate from there. It just says, yeah, he got in through the west gate. Okay, was there something wrong with the west gate? Was that, under maintenance? Was the electronic padlock down that day? I don't know. Skipping over to verse 9. For I am God the Creator, who, when I created my creatures, did not intend to destroy them. But after they had sorely roused my anger, I punished them with grievous plagues until they repent. Oh my God, this is so bad for the narrative. Okay, so what does it take to repent then? Because clearly Adam and Eve are remorseful over what they have done, and they are still very much loyal to you. At least in the Bible, God can be read as a massive dickhead who doesn't tolerate any kind of repentance for having committed the original sin. And yet in this text, he admits that there is a path for redemption, but doesn't divulge what course of action needs to be taken. He just keeps referring to how in 5 days he's going to supposedly let them back into the garden, which, as I said before, that's not repentance. That is not a punishment. That is a timeout. So what lesson are they meant to glean from this? What is going to change upon letting them back in? Is the knowledge just going to be wiped from their mind as soon as they come back in? I don't understand anything about this exercise because it all seems incredibly futile. Then the chapter ends. But if on the contrary they still continue hardened in their transgression, they shall be under a curse forever. So that is chapter 6. And then chapter 7, of course, I only have one note for, but we'll get to that. Let's read chat again here really quick. Westgate defective and has AIDS. Okay. God didn't invent how to be optimistic. Perhaps the devil did. I mean, if you read really into the whole narrative, I suppose. Well, I mean, that's the state of Adam and Eve's consciousness before consuming the fruit has always been very contentious to me, because what was really going on with them? Were they just kind of like zombies by that point, like brain and Jesus Christ? Okay, I don't know if you heard that, but it sounded like somebody took a sledgehammer to just some drywall in my house. My God. Yeah, the consciousness of them is kind of in that weird state where they don't have any direct quotes, I don't believe, from Genesis. So I don't even know if they were capable of speaking, prior to that. It might just be like that meme, reject modernity, return to Monchi. maybe that's the state that they were in. The Monchi states. It's all part of his plan. He intended for them to gain knowledge in a roundabout way. Okay, maybe, but why? I don't know. There's a little noise, but not too bad. Okay, good. I imagine that they were happy in an ignorant and innocent, childish way. That's pretty well explained and implied throughout the text, but at the same time, to what extent? Because the way that it's implied here is like, it's not just like child level intelligence, it's severely autistic child level intelligence. No problem, Liam. There's only a few people watching the stream anyway. I'm very disappointed in Susan. Then again, this is not everybody's cup of tea. I already know that. Okay, let's skip around again here until we get to chapter 7, verse 9. Because this is the only one that I really have any sort of notes for. Basically, early on in this chapter, Adam brings up that, during the covenant with God originally, he gave him the chance to name all of the different animals as he created them, which is the second account of creation according to Genesis. If you remember back to part 1, there's actually 2 creation stories presented, and it's taking more the narrative of the second one. And Adam and Eve are basically afraid that the animals on the earth are going to harm them now that they have broken their covenant with him. And God basically says, oh yeah, hold up real quick here, homie. Let me fix that for you. Snaps his fingers, and then all the dumb animals realize, okay, don't eat humans. And it says, then all the beasts paid homage to Adam according to the commandment of God, except the serpent, against which God was angry. It did not come to Adam with the beasts. So, of course, you missed lions, bears, crocodiles, hippopotamuses, literally every other animal which has been known to attack humans or otherwise, eat them. But make up your mind, book. Is the serpent which tempted Eve, is it the serpent which tempted Eve or Satan himself? We'll get clarification on that later. But for now, it just seems like snakes are now the enemy of man, regardless of whether or not it was really a snake or if it was Satan, as well, we'll get into that. Moving on into chapter 8. Nothing of note happens. It just says, the bright nature of man is taken away. This is basically the thing which contributes to man being able to see angels and God directly. So it's kind of an explanation for that. It was already touched up on earlier on in this book. Nothing notable in there. Chapter 9. Chapter 9, I have only one note, which is in reference to the third verse here, when they came and went near to that river and looked at it, the river being the one that waters the Garden of Eden, and saw that it was the water that came forth under the root of the tree of life in the garden. Basically, the only note I have here is just to keep it in the back of your mind that this is the river which is modernly known as Shat al-Arab, off the Persian Gulf, which feeds into both the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. However, chapter 9 contains... so I split up my notes into two ways for this book. There are the yellow notes where I write, my bullet points and everything for an explanation. And, we just kind of delineate from there. However, I also have my blue notes. And my blue notes are a suicide attempt counter. Now, I didn't count the first time like Adam beat his chest because I don't think that he was intentionally trying to kill himself in that one. However, in the 9th verse of the 9th chapter, we get this. But when Eve heard these words from him, she cried. And from the soreness of their crying, they fell into that water and would have put an end to themselves in it, so as to never again to return and behold their creation. So it's basically saying they jumped in the river, held their breath, and drowned. That's attempt number 1. Just remember that. We're gonna have a suicide counter by the end of this video. All right, so remember when I said before there's going to come a kind of sort of big reveal later on in the text, which was implied earlier. It comes in the form of chapter 10, verse 5. Then God said to Adam, "While you were under my command, you were a bright angel and knew not this water." So, and before, prior to that, I guess I should read the 4th passage. And Adam said, after he was raised, "O God, while we were in the garden, we did not require or care for this water, but since we came to this land, we cannot do without it." Effectively just saying, yeah, back in paradise, we didn't need to drink water, which is always very important. Drink your water, kids. But the reveal in 5. Again, I might be reading a little bit too much into this, so I'll give anybody who wants to profess this as part of their legitimate biblical canon the benefit of the doubt. But if we read this literally, then the angels are just humans who haven't attained sentience yet. Because literally the only thing that separates Adam and Eve from the angels is the fact that they lost their bright nature, quote unquote, and now have fleshy eyeballs. And they have also gained sentience from the fruit of knowledge. So there are a couple issues with this. And as we touched upon in episode 1, Genesis itself does not specifically state in which order the angels were created in reference to man. Later on, Book of Jubilees divulges that the angels were in fact created first, and if you read into the Quran, it does say that Satan and the other procession of angels were there when Adam and Eve were being created. So that's not an issue in those cases, but as of right now, it does present a bit of a dilemma. So if we choose to believe that we're going on a purely Genesis-based account, then that would mean that Adam and Eve were not only the first humans, but the first angels. Which then calls into question whose image they were made in, because remember, in Genesis, God specifically said, "Let us make him in our image." Again, I postulated that you could give them the benefit of the doubt with the later pseudepigraphical literature and canon literature, if you're a Muslim, that he was referring to the other angels. However, here, when you say specifically that these two were angels in the Garden of Eden, and that's if you choose to take it literally, then who was he referring to? Of course, the more likely answer and the more scholarly answer is that he was referring to the Canaanite gods, because remember, up until maybe about the middle point of Judaism, they were not monotheistic. They believed in multiple gods. They just had Yahweh as their main god above all the others. That's why they specifically mention Baal, whatever you want to call them, in the Old Testament. And they don't really even put too much context behind him. It's kind of understood that they would know by that point in the culture who he was. And that's because a lot of the Canaanite gods were shared. Yahweh himself is a Canaanite god, who devolves himself from Baal, whatever you want to call him. So it's not really clear who was conceived first in this story, but seemingly, seeing as it just ignores the Book of Jubilees, I'd wager I'm not too far off here. The Bible itself is very interesting when you read it. Unlike whoever the hell wrote this fan fiction. Like I said, this is not the most interesting thing in the world. There are a couple of humorous points. There are some points of clarification which are provided by this. But could you, go without ever hearing any of these stories? Yes. Absolutely. But whatever. And then in verse 6, I have another note. But now you have transgressed my commandment, and cannot do without water, wherein to wash your body and make it grow. For it is now like that of beasts, and is in want of water. So, God is saying that the beasts, despite also having lived in a garden alongside Adam and Eve before they were ejected for no apparent reason, have just always needed to drink water in order to stay alive. Why would you impose that upon the animals that you created after Adam and Eve, where but yet they don't have to rely on water. That literally makes no sense. I thought that was an imposition forced on everybody, every biological organism once they were kicked out of the garden, as, you know, penance, excuse me, for the original sin committed by Adam and Eve. I don't. Again, I'm asking way too many questions of this book. Let's just move along to chapter 11. Nothing happens here except in once we get into verse 3 here. Both Adam and Eve then went away from the water and drank none of it at all, but came and entered the cave of treasures. So now they are going on not a hunger strike, but a thirst strike, I suppose. Basically, they're saying, yeah, we're not going to drink any water. We're just going to starve our bodies and try and kill ourselves again. Because apparently 5 days is just too much to ask. And then we get into chapter 12. Again, nothing really interesting happens here. Basically, the whole gist of this chapter and the previous one is that inside the Cave of Treasures, Adam and Eve are both scared because they cannot see each other. They don't have a source of direct light. They're within darkness. And that is foreign to them because I guess it was always light out in the Garden of Eden. Just a very small thing I need to mention. And this one starts out, then Adam beat his chest, he and Eve, and they mourned the whole night until the crack of dawn, and they sighed over the length of the night in Miazia. I believe I'm saying that correctly. Miazia is a month of the Jewish calendar equivalent to April in the Gregorian calendar, roughly speaking. That's basically all I have to say on that one. However, verse 2, we get suicide attempt number 3. And Adam beat himself and threw himself on the ground in the cave from bitter grief and because of the darkness, and lay there as dead. So I read this as he climbed up the cave wall, jumped off it, and attempted to kill himself again. So this is the third attempt that he has made on his life. Fourth, if you choose to count the first time he beat his chest to the point where he stopped his own heart. And need I remind all of you, it has not even been a full day yet of their 5.5 day trial period, what it's like in the real world. Eve very quickly stops trying to kill herself, but Adam, the most melodramatic human being ever, continues to make attempts on his life from this point forward. So basically, what happens from there is Eve starts crying. They're like, oh God, why did you let the lights... Why did you let Adam die? And then God raises him up again. And then God tells him, hey, Adam, quit being such a pussy. It's just nighttime. This is what happens in the real world. However, there is something important to note. I don't know if it comes up specifically in this chapter or later on. I'm reading ahead here. No. I'm surprised I didn't leave myself a note. Okay. So basically, like I said, God raises him from the dead and says, okay, quit chickening out. It's just nighttime. And Adam's like, nighttime? I've never heard of that. So the implication is either he and Eve only lasted in the garden less than 12 hours, enough time for the sun to actually rise and fall. Because remember, in Genesis, God does create night and day. That is officially stated. He creates the sun and the moon to preside over the day and the night cycle. So that is a real thing. I guess that's, like I said, this is based more on church doctrine. So somebody probably told whoever the hell wrote this that, yeah, it's just always light in the Garden of Eden, and, just overlook the fact that it specifically states that they had not only days, but weeks, months, and years. I don't know. So that's the implication that's made there, is that they could not even last 12 hours before screwing up. Either that, or Adam's just retarded and doesn't remember what nighttime is like. All right. So, skipping ahead here, we're going to go all the way to chapter 14. Let me make sure that I'm not missing anything in chat here. Damn it! Pyrotic, you're right. I should have said unaliving themselves. This is why Susan doesn't recommend me to my subscribers. Dang it, I used the S word. Drat. Bible is definitely heathenistic in its origins. Yeah, heathenistic is a word. Did Eden have a hot topic? No, they had a Spencer's. Taco says later on, wait till Adam figures out that all his children need to be incestuous to continue humanity. He doesn't figure that out, but I think it's implied to him because God actually does spill the beans on the flood. He says, yeah, in a couple hundred years, I'm just going to get sick of all of you and try and wipe you out. He explicitly says that to Adam later on in this same book. So I guess, well, Adam doesn't really have too many brain cells to connect the dots together on that one, so maybe he doesn't realize that. But it's actually raises a point. I had seen a video a while back where, somebody was having one of those #deep internal conversations with himself, where he says, humanity is however old by this point. However, all you need to do is go back like 40 generations and you realize that we would exceed the capacity of the number of human beings who have ever lived on this planet and currently ever live on this planet. And so the conclusion that he reaches is that, well, that means that we're all related. No, that's not even remotely what that means. What that means is that your ancestors and my ancestors and everybody in this chat's ancestors probably bumped uglies with their first cousin or their sister or somebody who is in their immediate family at some point. You know, if you trace back the human genealogy, we are incredibly inbred, every single one of us. And it's only rather recently that we've actually gotten, you know, some sort of biodiversity within the gene pool of humans, mainly just due to like interethnic relationships. And, you know, that of course, you know, you get different colored kids, but at the same time, there's not a sharing of the family jewels, if you get what I what I mean. Great, I've bumped into my sister and I'm in. That's not what I meant. You know what I meant. But yeah, no, like look no further than the Habsburgs. Look, I mean, if I trace my family tree, I'm directly related to Mary, Queen of Scots, and that's not even me bragging. Like a billion people are. But you got to look at like especially the royal families. God, those guys intentionally inbred themselves. So, gene pool biodiversity, those two words don't belong together. But you get what I'm saying. I don't know if I'm phrasing that in the correct technical terms, but basically I'm explaining the major downfall of the idea of any kind of ethno-state, which is now, for some reason, a popular political theorem that people want to start, you know, oh, you know, we should all be amongst our own kind. Yeah, give it like 3 generations. You're all going to have misshapen teeth and elongated foreheads. Congratulations. You ruined your your family line. Anyway, okay, let's read ahead here. Chapter 14, verse 4. This one is pretty interesting. If you've already read the chapter of the title of the chapter, which I don't blame you by this point, I've been kind of stalling. You get what this is. But I will, when I shall come down from heaven and shall become flesh of your descendants, and take on myself the infirmity from which you suffer, then the darkness that covered you in this cave shall cover me in the grave, when I am in the flesh of your descendants. Doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out who he's talking about. So, but I want to make a point about this one. This passage, if nowhere else in this entire book, dates this production. Not just because it makes mentions of Jesus, but also because God says that he himself will come down in the form of Jesus. Why this is significant is because that this suggests that this book was written after the Second Council of Nicaea, which didn't just determine the divinity of Christ, but rather than the nature of his divinity. Prior to this meeting, historically speaking, there were 2 working theories as to who Jesus really was. Either he was the literal Son of God and did not exist prior to Yahweh inseminating Mary, or he has always existed as a part of God, and God himself is a composite figure of 3 separate entities, those being the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. I'm sure all of you have learned this in Sunday school, because that is now the new working theory. But putting that all aside, why even bother saying this to Adam and Eve right now? because by this point they only have about 4.5 days that they still have to live in the mortal world. Who cares if Jesus is coming? Like, literally, the whole reason why Jesus was sent was to educate, the people of God who have lost their way, and tell them, hey, listen, a life of sin, of being in poverty, and committing sin isn't all that bad. It's just human nature and all that other stuff. You got to deal with, you just got to deal with shit. Now, why would you bother doing that if by the end of this story, as it suggests, they make it back into the garden? It's literally a paradise realm. So yeah, Jesus comes in and he's like, hey man, what's going on? Good vibes all around. Yeah. And it's like, okay, so what's the big deal? Yeah, you're God. We talk to you all the time. We literally share the same defined space together. So I don't know the points, basically, is what I'm saying. And of course, this is a reference to John 12:46, whatever. It's not very important. Chapter 15, literally the shortest chapter in the entire book. Then Adam and Eve cried in sorrow by the reason of God's word to them, that they should not return to the garden until the fulfillment of the days decreed on them, but mostly because God had told them that he should suffer for their salvation. Probably not. If he lets it... Again, what is the point? Then, like... I don't get it. I'm so sorry. The supposedly smart man doesn't get the mental gymnastics of this book in particular. The Bible I actually have an easier time understanding because I can actually read, a lot more postulations from people who have had, centuries with the book to study it, deconstruct it, put forth their own philosophical theories and whatnot. This book, you probably won't even find a single blog post on it. And so basically everything that I have discussed up to this point has been stuff I've basically conjured up out of my own head. I did not have to do very much research for this, mainly because it's mostly rhetorical questions, but with a little bit of informational context sprinkled in there, like, the baptism thing. I had to, research on that, but that really wasn't the whole crux of the issue. He's coming home, coming home. Jesus Christ is coming home. And if they're back in the garden, they'll say, who are you? Chapter 16. This one's hilarious. Read the title. It's hilarious. Chapter 16, verse 5. O Lord, plague me not, neither consume me, nor yet take away my life from the earth. Adam thinks that the sun, which he has seen before, is literally just a giant death laser that God is sticking on him. And despite the fact that he has tried to kill himself 3 times now he's just like, oh God, please don't do this to me. By the way, something interesting to note about Adam's suicides is God returns him to life, but he never says, hey, don't do that. I don't like that. It's very interesting. I don't think it says anywhere in the Bible that suicide is immoral. I don't quote me on that. I haven't properly researched it, but I don't think so. I think that's a later doctrine introduced by the church, yeah. So, I mean, obviously don't go through it if you're thinking about it, but don't let religious dogma keep you from doing it, I guess. I'm sure most people who kill themselves don't consult God first, but yeah. Another note I had about this passage is, excusing the fact that there definitely was a night and day in the garden, as we already established, where does the garden derive its light from if it's not from the sun? I assume that God had created the sun for a purpose, and yet this is the first time that Adam is supposedly seeing it. And he's freaking out about it. So, this entire book makes no sense. That's the conclusion that I have drawn. It makes even less sense than the Bible. Stew on that one for a little bit. All right. So, skipping ahead again, we're going to go straight into chapter 17, the chapter of the Serpent. Excuse me 1 second. I'm getting a phone call again. I'll be right back. Yes, Amazon, I got my package. Jesus Christ. Again, I'm annoyed. All right, so chapter 17, the chapter of the serpent. The Adam and Eve, I don't know why they're referring to them that way now, but whatever, came out of the mouth of the cave and went towards the garden. But as they went near it, before the western gate from which Satan came when he deceived Adam and Eve, they found the serpent that became Satan coming at the gate and sorrowfully licking the dust and wriggling on its breast on the ground by the reason of the curse that fell on it from God. Remember, God struck off the serpent's legs back in Genesis. Now, I don't know if this is a translation error or not, but when it says the serpent who became Satan, that carries with it the implication that the snake transformed itself into Satan. However, this is supposed to mean, I can assume through context clues later on in the same book, that Satan possessed the snake and caused him to tempt Eve with the fruit. And, now he's just very angry over the fact that he had his legs lopped off. Even though he, just like Adam and Eve, is pretty much just as much of a victim. However, later on here in the same passage, the snake sees them, immediately blames them for getting him banished out of the garden. And so Adam attempts to have a fist fight with the snake, who does not have fists, but you get it. And then God is like, whoa, 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 whoa. No. And so he comes down. I believe it's in 18 or somewhere in here. Yeah. But God sent an angel who threw the serpent away from them and raised them up. Supposed to say in here, there's something about being able to... Yeah. And a wind blew down from heaven by the command of God and carried away the serpent from Adam and Eve and threw it onto the seashore where it landed in India. Very strange location, but okay. So the serpent is now turbo gone. It's just it's literally on a different, well, technically not a different continent, but it's so far away that it cannot feasibly get back to that same position to be a threat again. And then Adam starts to cry some more, saying, "Oh, but you promised that the beast wouldn't harm us." And then he's like, "Yeah, but I couldn't get the snake to agree. Sorry, but you don't have to worry about that anymore. I literally punted him all the way to a land which you are probably not going to be familiar with for ever. You're going to die before they discover India." Let me see here. Do I have any notes for this chapter? Chapter 19. Oh, yes, I do. It's another blue one. Verse 3. Then Adam, because of what had happened to him, beat his chest and fell on the ground like a corpse. So he just killed himself again because a snake spooked him. Suicide attempt number 4, ladies and gentlemen. The pious golden boy of God. Okay, so chapter 20, we get into that. Let me scroll down here. Basically, the entirety of the chapter is Adam wants to protect Eve, and he's like, "Hey, get rid of the snake." And then God's like, "You idiot, I just told you I got rid of the snake like twice already, idiot." And then he's like, "Oh, okay, thanks, bro. Praise be to you for having delivered us from death, blah, blah, blah." Now, chat. I'm looking at chat right now. What do you think happens in chapter 21? What do you think is the title of chapter 1? What do you think is the catalyst which drives the entire plot for this story in chapter 21? I want everybody to give a guess as to what happens in this chapter. All right, back after the quick break. Are we already at the 4th attempt? Yes, we are. Yep, Pyrotic, we're at the 4th attempt, and the only reason that he did it is because snakes are spooky. Crowing cockatrice, God could not get snakes to agree. I don't think that adds up. They kind of tried to wave it. Chat's already getting it right. They try to wave it by saying, the snake is pissed off with God for having lopped off his legs, which, I would be too, but like at the same time, he did also just kick every animal out of the Garden of Eden. So I would think that it would be more than just the snake that's a little resentful towards humanity. Spooky noodles frighten me. Me beat chest till die. So, getting back to it, if you predicted suicide, chapter 21, Adam and Eve attempt suicide. Number 5. So the actual attempt doesn't go down up until it starts here. went in search of the garden. I don't know why you would have to search for something where you already know where it is, but you already also know that they're not going to let you back in. And the heat beat like a flame on their faces, and they sweated from the heat and cried before the Lord. But the place where they cried was close to a high mountain facing the western gate of the garden. Then Adam threw himself down from the top of the mountain. His face was torn and his flesh was ripped. He lost a lot of blood and was close to death. I like this. I like this suicide attempt number 5, particularly because there's no provocation at all this time. Like, I understand the past few times the justification behind it has been very weak. But why did he do this? It said that he's trying to get up towards the garden, and it mentions that it's a little hot. So I guess, oh man, I'm sweating slightly. Time to die. And then in verse 7 here, then she threw herself after him and was torn and ripped by stones and remained lying as dead. But merciful God, who looks over his creatures, looked at Adam and Eve as they lay dead and sent his word to them and raised them, and then proceeds to remind them again about the 5-day agreement, which, okay, this has gone on far enough. If your creations have tried to kill themselves 5 times over the course of less than 2 days, this punishment is not working out, okay? Because they even specifically said, say, I can't remember which chapter it is. It's maybe chapter 23 or 4 or something like that. There is actually a way for them to kill themselves and supposedly stay dead. And it's mentioned somewhere, if I happen to glance at it as we're skimming through this work, I'll bring it up. But it said that if Adam and Eve were to get too close to the cherub who's guarding the garden, his sword would just incinerate him. And then God says to Adam, he's like, yeah, if that happens, I can't do anything about it. It's definitive by that point. So I don't know what the hell is happening in this book. So chapter 22 is basically Adam all about crying, I never had to deal with heat and drinking water and all this other bullshit when I was in the garden. You suck, Dad. But then what they do, oh wait, I'm at chapter 23. God's like, okay, listen, guys, you just have to stick it out for like another 3 days or so, all right? Just deal with it till then. And so that reassures them again. And so what they do now is they make an altar towards God, the first altar, in fact. And the first... Okay, I need to backtrack a little bit here. Why is this note here? Hold on. Oh, yeah, this one's kind of weird. Yeah, wait a second. These first 3 verses are kind of weird. Then Adam cried more and said, "Oh God, have mercy on me, so far as to take on yourself that which I will do." He again reminded them that Jesus is coming. It has absolutely no relevance on the plot by this point, but whatever. Verse 2, but then God withdrew his word from Adam and Eve. Then Adam and Eve stood on their feet, and Adam said to Eve, not the other way around, strengthen yourself, and I will also strengthen myself. Yes, because Eve is the inconsolable, suicidal, hot topic frequenting man baby who killed herself multiple times by this point for a multitude of reasons, ranging from snakes are scary and the sun is hot. What a dickhead Adam is. He's just a fucking asshole. Okay. So we're gonna go ahead, skip ahead here. Verse 6, then Adam and Eve stood under the altar and cried, thus praying to God, "Forgive us our trespass." And then they have like a little asterisk there, which is supposed to denote a footnote at the very bottom of the of this passage, which is supposed to say, "Oh, this is in reference to the Lord's Prayer, in case you didn't know that, because you're retarded or something." I don't know. Maybe it could be just like a cultural thing, but even still, it's kind of like, who hasn't heard the Lord's Prayer? I can recite maybe half of it, maybe a little more than half of it, but I don't know. But then it says a little bit further on down here, "For when we were in the garden, our praises and our hymns went up before you without ceasing." So, again, I might be reading a little too much into this, and it's kind of a minor thing. But does this mean to imply that Adam and Eve, in addition to being literal angels before the fall, were also seraphim, constantly shouting, "Holy, holy, holy," as we denoted in our angelic hierarchy video? Perhaps. Perhaps this is either a case of the author of this book having done a little bit of research, or having somebody tell him the doctrine surrounding seraphim, or far more likely, this is a happy accident, and he just so happened to get something right in a very roundabout way, in a reference which I and a total of maybe 5 people on the face of the planet would have gotten upon reading this their first time around. That's not me humble bragging. That's me saying I am such a fucking nerd that I have no life, and I actually have time to study this sort of thing and be able to pick up on pattern recognition like that. God, are we getting anywhere? Okay, my next note is on chapter 24, but I'm going to check in here really quick on chat. We're on day 2 and I've already had 5 attempts. Yeah, Adam is putting all of the girls I went to middle school with to shame. James Strong, I vote and say that they should commit suicide more. I don't think they do it again yet. In the few more passages that we're going to go through before calling it a day here. We're actually, believe it or not, we're almost towards the end. We're in the home stretch here, boys and girls. God is a Tard Wrangler. Yes. Okay. So, like I said, chapter 24. God says something very interesting. Verse 4. Then came the word of God to Adam and said to him, O Adam, as you have shed your blood, so will I shed my own blood when I become flesh of your descendants. And as you died, O Adam, so also will I die. And as you built an altar, so also will I make for you an altar of the earth. And as you offered your blood on it, so also will I offer my blood on an altar on the earth. Okay? Keep this in mind, because this is the first time that God mentions anything about Jesus dying. He only said before, I'm going to come to you and your descendants in mortal flesh later on. He did not specifically say that it was for the purpose of being crucified and, being the lamb for the lost shepherds, or whatever symbolism you attach to that. So my note here is, so does this mean that Jesus only died because Adam tried to kill himself here? The single, probably most important event throughout history, which may or may not have actually happened, is entirely because Adam is a crunchy anime loving fucking liberal piece of shit who kills himself every time life gets remotely hard. I realize that looking for logic in the Bible, especially in this book, is a fool's errand. But God has already told Adam about Jesus' coming, and that he would be a descendant of his. So why would you even bother trying to kill yourself? You know God is just going to Goku your ass every time you die. Without exception. I don't understand. Like Adam can kill himself as many times as he wants. He's just going to get brought back. And it won't even take a year, like it does in Dragon Ball. It'll just happen. It's completely worthless. As is my one-sentence summary of this entire book. Chapter 25. Chapter 25, chapter 25, chapter 25. So, God is represented as merciful and loving, the establishing of worship. Despite the fact that literally 2 chapters earlier, Adam said that he worshipped God continuously all the time in the Garden of Eden. But I guess they forgot about that. Autism is a horrible thing, isn't it? Verse 4. Adam, continues to state to God, I tried to kill myself once and for all, but having transgressed your commandments, that's the whole reason that I want to die, is because you're making me suffer, God. And then in verse 4, he says directly, Yet of your goodness, O God, do not get rid of me altogether, but be favorable to me every time I die, and bring me to life. So, Adam, preceding this, he says that the reason that he had tried to kill himself was so that he could draw blood and burn it at said altar to honor God. Apparently, the only way to draw blood for a sacrifice is to attempt suicide. But don't worry, you guys. If this nonsense is to be believed, if you do it in praise of God, he'll immediately respawn you back into the game. Yeah, you'll be cut out of the 40 virgins that you were promised, but suddenly strapping a bomb to your chest to slaughter the infidels doesn't sound like such a bad rep, now does it? Thank my non-existent God that this book was not canonized, because I'm sure that there would be somebody out there trying to justify religious terrorism and citing this chapter. It's an incredibly dangerous precedent, as is any precedent, put forth when you put too much stock into religious scripture. But it's, like I said, it's a good thing for both the narrative and the lore of the Bible that this was not canonized. And it's also a good thing because the morals in this are completely fucked up. So, moving right along, I have one more note for today, and then we're going to move over into the Q&A section. So be sure to get those out either in the comments section, or not comments section, the side chats, or Q&A section of the Discord if you prefer to leave it there. We're going to go straight on into chapter 26, A Beautiful Prophecy of Eternal Life and Joy, version 15. Don't know why that's there, but verse 15. I'm an idiot. And the fall of night. Basically, what happens here is Adam does a 180 again, and he decides that he's scared of night now because he's been in the sun all day. Thankfully, he doesn't try and kill himself this time, but he basically is pleading to God. It's like, don't take away the death laser that I was scared of before. What's the verse I want to draw attention to? But God says, listen, night's going to fall. Deal with it for like 12 hours. Please stop crying all the time. I beg you. So picking up right here at verse 11. Yes, rather than bear long and calm your soul while you live night and day until the fulfillment of the days and the time of my covenant is come. Then I shall come and save you, O Adam. And here's the important part that I want you all to pay attention to. For I do not wish that you be afflicted. That, boys and girls, is a surprisingly well done bit of what we call in the business foreshadowing. And it's going to become very relevant what God means here by saying that he does not wish for him to be afflicted. I think you've already put it together what's going to happen by the end of this book. And that is, obviously, they don't get back into the garden. Cain and Abel are born. Cain slaughters Abel. Then they have a third son, Seth, and then we get into Genesis 5, which is basically just a big family tree from there. However, you're probably wondering why they inevitably don't get back into the garden yet. And this line is particularly important for that. And this book does something very malicious with how they try to portray God. They essentially try to have their cake and eat it too, is all I'm going to delineate at this time. But at the end of this, it's not going to turn out very well for anybody involved, and it is directly God's fault, but he will not admit to it. So anyway, that is the lesson for today. That's all the notes I have for right now. Like I said, episode 3, we're going to pick up with the story right where we left off. I'm probably going to be paraphrasing it right from the start from there. Just so that we don't take too long with it. I mean, we're already at 2 hours and 20 minutes and we only read like 20 pages or so, mainly just because of my note taking. And that's even after expediting the process from there. But like I said, you're not missing out on much. This book is primarily filler between Genesis 3 and 4. Well, actually, it kind of summarizes Genesis 4 as well, but that's neither here nor there. So if anybody has any questions, I will be taking those right now. In the meantime, I am going to pour some liquid down my throat because I am very tired of talking by this point. I don't have a problem. You have a problem. I can stop anytime I want. Let's check the Q&A section here. That art guy just said hi and then just left it at that. Trying to fuck with me. I think all that was from the previous stream that Pyrotic was mentioning about Arab families and stuff like that. I get why God wouldn't want them back in the garden if they were like this. Yeah. Yeah, there's a reason that they say every time you make waffles, you throw the first batch out. I think that's Adam and Eve are the walking, talking personification of that idea. At least in this book. Obviously, after Genesis 3, they really don't have any kind of presence at all in the rest of the biblical narrative. Because Genesis 4 is basically Cain and Abel's chapter, and then Genesis 5 is genealogy, and then we immediately jump into the flood story from there. So maybe they were always like this, but I doubt it. Maybe God should have stopped at Lilith and just said, wait, no, don't go. Here, I'll make you a submissive man. Just, I'll even vaporize this fool. Just please don't go. You're the only sensible thing I've created. That's a thought I've had. How did Lilith know that she was getting the short end of the stick in the early parts of Genesis? Because she didn't eat from the fruit of the tree of knowledge, at least not to the extent that we know. Oh, James Strong, asking a question here again. I'm sorry, I missed him. How old are you? Pyrotic Napalm attempts to answer that, but he does it incorrectly. He says mid-20s. I'm not actually that old yet, honestly. Well, 23. I don't know if that can be considered mid-20s. I consider mid-20s to be like literally 25. 24, 25, 26. That's like your mid-20s, but whatever. Do you think that the tree of knowledge and the tree the Buddha meditates under are similar, if not related? I don't think so. Because as far as I'm aware, the tree that the Buddha sits under isn't necessarily significant in any sort of like spiritual sense. It's literally just a place where he, sits down and takes a load off, and it's just like, oh wait, everything sucks. Just basically a summary of Buddhism as a philosophy. No, I don't think that they're necessarily similar in any way. Especially considering like the tree of life is explicitly like the source of immortality for a human soul. Buddhism doesn't really deal in any kind of like prophetic, like miracle sort of working, do this and you'll live forever, and Buddha or whatever. I don't know. So no, I don't think that they're related. I think you might be reading a little too much into it by then. Asked a question I get asked every single stream. What is your favorite mythology? Shinto. I have been reading a little bit more into other mythologies, and I thought that Shinto was just like super weird because I actually started out reading the holy texts. No, it is not at all that is not at all the case. Every other mythology ever, if you actually read the source material, it is all very strange. But yeah, as of right now, Shinto is in the lead. I would probably say like Hinduism is like in second place. My favorite god belongs to Hinduism. Let's just say that. I might make a video for patrons, like listing like my top 10 favorite gods or divine figures or whatever like that. That might be interesting little Patreon content that I can, pull out of my asshole, and it won't take me too long to make. 5 quick steps to immortality, which will annoy all doctors. Doctors hate him. I was going to say, a while back, I had actually wrote something about a golden fruit. This is one of my stories that I was writing, which it grew every century or so. And its effects were sort of like the tree of life, but they were dependent upon your human condition at the time. So like if you were dead and you were a wandering spirit and you ate the fruit, you would be returned to life. If you were alive, but like terminally ill or like injured to the point where you're close to death and you take a bite out of it, that means that you're healed of all illnesses and you'll have a long and healthy life. But if you're perfectly healthy and you eat the fruit, then you get immortality. And I think that's a pretty good trade-off. Like, would you rather, live forever with a terminal illness, or would you rather just eat the fruit, get rid of the terminal illness, and live to be 100 with no serious health conditions? I mean, that's kind of how I saw it. I don't know. I might share those links someday to the stories, but not today. And unfortunately, it looks like today is, right now, it rather is going to be the end of today's stream. I want to thank everybody for coming along and showing up in the live chat, even though Susan is horrible about everything. Hopefully next time for episode 3, the notification will go out to everybody. Best way to do that, to make sure that you get informed, though, is to hit the little bell thing when you subscribe, if you are subscribed. And then you'll get an alert every time I go live or publish a new video or something to that effect. So, yes, thank you for everybody for showing up. Next episode will come out relatively quickly, I promise. But until then, my name is Messiahs of Mythology, and I hope you all have a God's blessed day.